In the year 2005, in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, there was a small private island where no tourist visited and no media camera could reach. From the outside, the place looked like a luxury paradise. Blue ocean, white sand, and high security boundaries. But on this very island, behind closed doors, one of the darkest crimes of modern history was taking place. Music, a young girl's trafficking and sexual exploitation. This was not a movie scene. This was the truth that later became part of U.S. investigation records and court documents. The girls were sometimes lured with money, sometimes with job offers, and sometimes brought to this secret island in the name of help. As soon as they arrived there, their world changed. There were facilities all around. Helipad, guest houses, private dock, CCTV-like security. But the thing that was missing the most was law, consent, and justice. And at the center of this entire network was one name, Jeffrey Epstein. A person who, music, in public image was called a billionaire financier and an insider of elite social circles, but whose real identity remained in the shadows for years. The real question was how all this continued so openly for so many years and why no one stopped it. When some teenage girls in Palm Beach, Florida, first filed complaints before the police, no one had thought that this case would not remain just a local crime. Gradually, this case turned into a global scandal. A scandal in which money, power, politics, and system failure were all going to collide together. And then came the year 2019. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again at the federal level with serious charges of sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. But by then it was too late. Because the voices of the girls that had been ignored for years had now turned into a question that was being asked by the entire world. Music, this is where this story begins. From a secret island to a jail cell and to a man whose death did not bury the truth but instead made it even more mysterious and dangerous. In this special episode today, we will learn who Jeffrey Epstein really was and how an ordinary man became the master of this dark empire of money, influence, and crime. In the year 1953, in the Brooklyn area of New York, Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born. There was no royal family, no business empire, and no extraordinary beginning. His father was an ordinary government employee and his mother worked as a school assistant. From the outside, this was a completely middle-class American family from which usually either a normal job or a quiet life comes out. Epstein's education was also not very different. He enrolled in college but never completed his degree. There was no formal education in finance and no elite MBA. Yet later the same man was seen sitting among the richest and most powerful people in the world. This was the first mystery on which even investigators later raised questions. In the early 1970s, Epstein got a job teaching maths and physics in a prestigious private school in New York. This was the same school where children of rich families studied. Children of politicians, bankers, and CEOs. From here Epstein got his first chance to closely see the elite world. Here he learned how money thinks and how power behaves. But Epstein did not remain a teacher for long. Suddenly, without any clear public explanation, he left education and entered the world of high finance. In 1976, he got a job in a top investment bank and from here his life completely changed direction. The question still remains the same today. Without a degree, without a track record, how was such a big entry possible? By 1980, Epstein began presenting himself as a financial advisor and money manager. But his work was not like that of ordinary advisors. His clients were not public. His companies were opaque, meaning no special details about them existed, and his transactions mostly happened through private trusts and shell-like structures. Gradually Epstein was no longer just a man who managed money. He became an access provider. A person who connected rich people with rich people, gave private spaces to powerful individuals, and made himself useful everywhere. This usefulness later became both his biggest strength and his biggest danger. In public image, he was a quiet billionaire. Few interviews, music, few statements, and almost zero transparency. But behind the curtain, luxury properties, private jets, and those secret locations were increasing in his life, glimpses of which the outside world saw much later. From here, this story stops being just the success story of one man. It begins to turn into a question that still remains unanswered today. Was Jeffrey Epstein truly a self-made financier or a pawn in some other game? Now the question becomes even more serious. How did Jeffrey Epstein become so rich? Because where the wealth of ordinary financiers is clearly visible through companies, stock holdings, and clients, Epstein's money story was opaque and confusing from the very beginning. In public records, neither his large-scale investments are clearly visible nor is it known what revolutionary business model he adopted, music, through which he reached hundreds of millions of dollars. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Epstein positioned himself on Wall Street as a high-level financial advisor. He claimed that he worked only for ultra-rich clients, clients whose names never appeared in public. This was the first red flag because transparency is a basic norm in the finance industry. But Epstein's entire model was based on secrecy. Gradually he created the image that he not only managed money but was also an expert in tax planning, asset protection, and confidential wealth structuring. His companies mostly operated through private trusts and limited partnerships, which made it very difficult to trace real ownership and cash flow. According to investigators, this structure later became a shield for him. A large part of Epstein's wealth is said to be connected with Leslie Wexner, who at that time was a major American billionaire. Wexner gave Epstein extraordinary access to his finances. Epstein was even given power of attorney. This was the point where Epstein's life changed overnight. A multi-million-dollar mansion in New York, private jets, and global travel all started during this period. But from here the questions became deeper. Finance experts and journalists repeatedly pointed out that there was no major hedge fund, no famous IPO, and no public financial success story in Epstein's name. Yet his lifestyle kept expanding. This meant money was coming in, but its source was not public. Because of this secrecy, many people proposed the theory that Epstein was not just an investor but worked like an information broker. A person who used access, introductions, and influence like currency. Proof is not fully public, but it is clear that his wealth cannot be explained through traditional finance rules. By the year 2000, Epstein had become a man who operated like a behind-the-scenes power player. He stayed away from the spotlight, gave no interviews, and revealed very little about his work. But the luxury visible in his life clearly indicated one thing. This wealth was not ordinary. From here Epstein's story stopped being just about money. It became a story of power, secrecy, and control, whose next chapter leads towards his business networks, shell companies, and hidden operations. Until now, we have seen that money came and power increased. But one basic question still remains unanswered. What exactly did Jeffrey Epstein do? Because usually any billionaire is known by his business, some factory, some brand, or some hedge fund. But in Epstein's case, this identity was blurred from the beginning. He claimed that he worked only for ultra-high net worth individuals, people who wanted privacy and wished to stay away from any kind of investigation. This is why most of his work remained off the record. Epstein's companies were also unusual. There was no large corporate setup, no thousands of employees, but small private entities, trusts, and limited partnerships. These structures were designed in such a way that tracing where the real money was coming from and where it was going would not be easy. According to investigative journalists, this design was Epstein's greatest strength. His primary office operated from an extremely expensive mansion in New York, which itself was a red flag. Usually finance firms operate from glass buildings, but Epstein's entire setup was spread across personal properties and private spaces. Meetings did not happen in boardrooms but in private homes, jets, and islands. Jeffrey Epstein did not just manage money. He managed connections. He introduced people to people, politicians to billionaires, scientists to donors, and business leaders to global access. Gradually he himself became a gatekeeper without whom certain high-level introductions were not even considered possible. This role made him dangerous because when a person starts controlling information, access, and privacy, he no longer remains just an advisor. He becomes a power broker. In Epstein's case, many people later raised the same question. Was he really running finance, or was he managing something else under the cover of finance? By the year 2000, Epstein's business model had become completely non-transparent. No annual reports, no clear disclosures, and no public list of clients. Yet his lifestyle kept expanding, which indicated that his system was working, but silently. And from here Epstein's story takes another, music, turn. Because as money and access increased, private jets, luxury properties, and secret locations also began to become part of his life.